Picture the scene. At the end of a muggy afternoon, thunder rumbling far away, Lucas, the famous lawyer who's known for never losing, pushes open the rusty door of an old library out in the countryside. He's on a mission to serve an eviction notice. No time for small talk, just thinking about his next case. But what he finds there changes everything. Behind a desk overflowing with worn-out books, there's Clara. Her eyes are tired, but steady. Alone, wrestling with piles of paperwork, debts, and the threat of watching years of work collapse. At the tensest moment, when she realizes she could lose not only the building but also her city's last hope, Clara stands up and looks at him. Her voice trembling but filled with courage. Someone needs to fight for the books. Do you understand that? You can feel the weight of that question in the air. Will Lucas, with all the scars he carries, resist that plea or finally let his heart do the talking? Don't go anywhere, because what seemed like just another case is about to turn into a battle between reason, justice, and a love no one saw coming. At first, it's just oddness. The town feels frozen in time, uneven sidewalks, antique lamp posts, a heavy silence, so unlike the noise of Sao Paulo, as Lucas instantly notices. He parks in front of a one-story building with peeling paint, quaint curtains in the windows, and a faded sign, Monteiro Library. There's the damp smell of earth mixed with the scent of coffee wafting from a nearby bakery. But he's not here to enjoy the scenery, not that he'd care if he were honest. It's 2:45. Lucas straightens his tie and checks his black briefcase for the umpteenth time. The documents are there. Eviction order, legal paperwork, everything in order. Deep down, he imagines this will be quick, a signature, maybe some arguing. It's always the same. He expects pushback, but the passive kind. That small-town calm always seemed cowardly to him. But when he pushes open the door and steps inside, he's instantly hit by a different air. It's warm, dusty, and thick with something he can't name. There's a child drawing on the floor, crooked bookshelves, and a young woman in a blue dress, her back to him, arranging books on a table. Light streams through dirty windows, slicing through the dust and bathing everything in gold. She doesn't flinch at the soft sound of the door. She just stops what she's doing and turns around, slowly. Her gaze is level, steady as a drawn line. That's what he notices first, the steadiness. She doesn't look away, doesn't force a smile, doesn't shrink in front of a suited stranger. She studies him. He expects pleading or fear but finds something else. Maybe defiance. For a few seconds, silence. Lucas steps forward, practice posture, back straight, dry voice, neutral tone. Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Lucas Ferreira, legal representative for the development company. She folds her arms slowly, as if shielding the books behind her. They're books, somehow. She stares at him and answers calmly, with a tense edge, I was expecting someone. Thought it'd be a bailiff, not a lawyer in a suit. He notices an open book on the table. An old novel, worn cover. Coffee stain on the edge, a child's scribble in the corner. There's some tenderness there, but the moment is more about what goes unsaid. He feels it strange. Everything in this room quietly asks him to feel something besides impatience. But he doesn't let himself. He checks his file, pulls out a document, and his hand sweats for just a second. Rare for Lucas. You want to see the property paperwork, don't you? She says, before he even asks. Doesn't wait for his explanation. She's used to this, he thinks. The world always trying to take away what little she has. He just nods. Not sure why, but it's easier to avoid her eyes. He opens the file on the table, beside the book. The silence that falls is anything but empty. It's heavy, almost uncomfortable, filled by the buzz of an old fan and the muffled laughter of a child in the background. Everyone in the room seems to slow down, waiting for the first move. He delivers his lines from memory, as technical as possible. Talks about procedure, orders, the company's rights. The same speech he's given 100 times, nearly robotic. He misses the traffic noise, the elevators, the bitter office coffee. Here, everything is raw. Every word weighs more. There's no distraction. She listens without interrupting. Grips the arm of her chair, her hand tightening now and then. He notices. And he notices, too, that she's not going to apologize or tell a sob story for pity. She's not that kind of woman. When she finally speaks, it sounds rehearsed from repeating it to herself. This library has been here since before I was born. Every book was donated, one by one. The kids come here because they have nowhere else to go. The land may have changed hands, but getting rid of this library won't be so simple. Lucas hears her voice waver on won't be so simple, but she doesn't drop her gaze. She doesn't show weakness. Keeps looking at him as though she can see through the polished, distant advocate. A child stumbles nearby and drops a book. The thump echoes in the silent room. Clara kneels, helps the boy, whispers something Lucas can't hear. The boy grins, color returning to his cheeks, and goes back to playing. Lucas observes the small gestures. Her gentle hand putting the book back on the shelf, the warmth in her gaze, the deep sigh before she stands up. For some reason, he feels a strange tightness in his chest. As if these people, so far from his world, actually had something real to lose. But he doesn't let himself weaken. He composes his face, recalls the goal, the bonus, his obligation to the firm. Another case, another successful execution. Yet something, he can't explain what gets stuck in his throat. Clara wipes her hand on her dress and lifts her chin. You don't understand what these books do here. He thinks of answering with sarcasm. Thinks of saying he understands more than she imagines. But the truth is he doesn't. Not anymore. It's been a long time since he felt what he sees in the children's eyes, or in the stubborn way she clings to every page as if she's holding back time itself. Tension rises, but no one raises their voice. It's all in the looks, in the little movements. He sees her hands tremble slightly when she talks about hope, but she doesn't back down. And he feels a strange discomfort, doubt. Why did this woman, this place, shake him so much? When he leaves, he carries the scent of old books and coffee, and an uneasy feeling, as if the case was only just beginning, not ending. He walks to his car, the weight of that forgotten library a stone in his chest, mixed with memories he didn't know he still had. In the end, it's only the beginning. And now he isn't sure he's ready for it. The library's hallway seemed to shrink as Lucas entered, brown envelope in hand. Just another piece of paper, eviction notice, like so many others he'd delivered. This should be easy. No one here could stand up to his pen, he thought. But deep down, he knew, this dusty place held a bittersweet scent of a forgotten childhood, years spent lost in pages and dreams. It bothered him, but he pushed it aside. He had a job, and that was that. Clara sat behind the worn-out wooden desk, pale skin marked by sleepless nights, hair hastily tied back, with loose strands falling into her face. When she finally looked up, Lucas saw weariness and a thinly veiled fear. But her gaze was stubborn. She waited, unmoving, while he stretched the paper toward her. Mrs. Clara Monteiro? He forced a neutral voice. No emotion, just as he had learned in the cold halls of the courts. She didn't answer at first. Simply took the envelope slowly, the paper trembling a little in her fingers. He noticed, but said nothing. Just waited for her to open it, pretending to be distracted by an open book on the desk, The Little Prince, its cover battered from use. Silence aged there, between them. He felt like straightening his jacket, but didn't move. The hallway felt long, maybe endless. Outside, someone kicked a ball down the sidewalk. In here, only the sharp sound of Clara breaking the envelope seal. She read quickly, catching her breath between paragraphs, as if drowning a little with every line. When she finished, she looked at him. She didn't ask for time or beg for pity. Do you know what this paper means to these kids? Her voice was thin, but not weak. The voice of someone who has fought too many battles, and Lucas felt a sting somewhere deep in his chest. He tried to keep things businesslike. There's a legal process, Mrs. Clara. The land was sold. The developer has rights. I'm just here to carry out a decision. Rights? She gave a short, humorless laugh. Can you tell me where is the right for the kids who come here because they've nowhere else to go when it rains? Or for the girl who learned to read right there on the floor because her home is never quiet? Your piece of paper is cold, sir, but the people here aren't. Her eyes shined anger, sadness, maybe both tangled together. Lucas averted his gaze to a bookshelf. He wanted to run, but had nowhere to go. Not yet. I understand your attachment, but there's an order, he said, voice lower than he intended. Not true, not really. He understood nothing. He hated how much he felt like the villain in this story. She breathed deep, swallowing the emotion that nearly spilled over. Only then did she stand up. Small movement, but the air in the hall changed. Clara became a wall between Lucas and that place, as if the books needed her to stand at all. You don't understand anything, she went on. To me, these aren't just books. This is home. It's hope for the kids no one sees. It's a dream. And you can't just throw dreams out on the street. Everything about her was resistance. The way she gripped the envelope so hard it almost tore. How she bit her lip to keep from crying in front of him. Lucas wanted to say something, but the words vanished. The room shrank under the silence. He tried to rationalize. How many Claras had he faced before? How many schools, buildings, even hospitals? It was never personal. It was the law. But here, just for a second, he couldn't see just the paper. He saw those little chairs, a child's handwritten letter on the wall. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the scent of old paper. Everything felt wrong. Her hand shook as she set the paper down, carefully, next to pencil crayon sketches. This wasn't theater. It was real loss. They'll kick me out of here, won't they? Not today, maybe. But they will. She looked at him, and in that moment Lucas understood. She wasn't trying to convince him. She just had to fight until the end, even if the end was coming anyway. He started to speak, but there was no legal argument to fit that deeply human fear. He swallowed hard. His mind flashed to when he last lost someone. He'd forgotten what it was like to watch someone about to lose everything. Suddenly, his stomach dropped. The shelves, dusty bookcases, the gentle dust dancing in the late afternoon light. Everything seemed whole and broken at once. Clara brushed past him, breathing deep, gripping the desk as if steadying herself in the present moment. There was a strange strength in her eyes. A silent plea that at least he wouldn't take pleasure in what he was doing. The silence was heavy. You could hear a mosquito buzzing near the window. The smell of rain crept in. The small town outside kept going. Cars drifted by slowly, without hurry, far from the little tragedy unfolding indoors. Lucas could have left. The notice had been served. But he stayed, standing there, watching Clara reshelve books almost on autopilot. It was a defiant sadness, someone refusing to give up, even when the battle's already lost. In those seconds, Lucas realized. It wasn't pride. It was pain. A silent pain that echoed the chill of his mother's office years ago, when life suddenly took everything without asking. Clara wiped her face quickly, not wanting him to see the start of tears. But he saw and felt a lump he couldn't name. He left, not quite looking behind him, his shoes thumping across the wooden floor louder than he liked. He went without saying goodnight, without wishing her strength, without promising anything. Just carrying a piece of her, and that library with him, as if for the first time he doubted he was on the right side. On the way to the car, the rain grew heavier. Lucas climbed in, shut the door, and sat in silence, hands on the wheel, watching the fogged-up glass. Clara's words echoed back, beating hard. Maybe, he thought, he just lost more than a simple case. The day dawned gray, one of those mornings when the sky feels like frosted glass. Lucas walked through the square with measured steps, trying to ignore the kids skidding across the damp ground with books in their hands. He just wanted to get this over with, close another cycle, and go back to Sao Paulo, to his office, his rootless silence. But something made Lucas stop. Maybe the sound of laughter, so out of place for people on the edge of eviction. Maybe the way Clara laughed, despite the dark circles and hastily tied hair, talking about the favorite book characters of each child. She seemed to be holding up the world and balancing a handful of bright bookmarks at the same time. He lingered there, half hidden behind a bench, feigning indifference in his crisp suit. The children saw him. At first, they stopped playing. Their eyes, wide, some whispers. That's him, the lawyer. A little girl with red glasses hid behind Clara's back. Clara spotted him too. Her eyes narrowed a bit, not in anger, maybe in defense. She didn't speak. She just kept going, each word a shield, explaining that even the best heroes make mistakes, that even those who do everything right can feel scared. And Lucas, listening in, caught himself distracted by her voice, calm and steady, so different from the coldness he carried inside from a lifetime in offices. Suddenly one boy, the kind who doesn't know how to be afraid for long, broke away and approached. Shyly asked if Lucas wanted to have coffee with them. Lucas thought of saying no. Easier to keep his distance. But those eyes wouldn't accept no. You could see it in how they waited. He went, sat on the edge of the worn-out rug, slightly apart, feeling the children's eyes burning into his expensive suit. Someone pressed a plastic cup of coffee, too sweet, into his hand. He didn't know what to do with it. He was afraid he'd spill it, afraid he'd look fragile, afraid to be seen. The silence was strange. It wasn't the clear-cut silence of an office, but filled with anticipation. The kids whispered, glancing at him, at Clara. She stood, tidying up books, speaking only when needed. Lucas noticed no one in that room was pretending. No fake smiles. No glossy manners. He felt jealous, that sense of knowing exactly where you belong. Real kids, worn-out books, a woman exhausted and whole at once. In the middle of the chatter, someone asked him which book had marked his childhood. Lucas froze. He couldn't think of any. Only courtrooms came to mind, worried adult voices about bills and contracts. He answered that he never had time for stories. His parents only cared that he be serious. The children looked as if they'd heard something sad but didn't press. Clara looked hard at Lucas, saying nothing. A searching look, as if hoping for a crack in his armor. She didn't try to comfort him, she just let silence settle around them. And right there, he felt a strange pressure in his chest. Awkward, heavy, but somehow he wanted to stay just a bit longer. The makeshift table creaked as one child climbed on it again, laughter returned, muffled, and the group started debating the next book to read aloud. Lucas watched, trying to imagine what living like this would feel like. A hard life, constant crises, but the comfort of someone meeting your eyes, children hanging on your arms, giggling for no reason, knowing you belong to someone, somewhere. Clara sat beside him but kept her distance, body turned slightly away. Between them, a plate of cookies no one touched. Her breathing was loud, nervous. Maybe because, even in the middle of a war, everyone was watching. Lucas just wished he could disappear. Any word would sound forced. He wanted to ask how she managed, to say he missed having a home, but he kept quiet. Time slipped by lazily in that cold peace of morning. When he finally announced he had to leave, Clara only nodded. Their eyes met, not an apologetic look, almost a dare. She stared back as if to say, "You can be whoever you want, but you don't scare me." And from his side, just a strange urge to apologize for something he couldn't name. He walked away across the square, coffee still warming his stomach, the rest of him cold. He wasn't sure what hurt more, her indifference or realizing that, this morning, he was just a stranger anywhere. Lucas carried the sweetness of coffee, the sound of laughter, Clara's glassy gaze, that raw feeling of having lost something he'd never even had. And as the library faded in the fine mist, he understood that, in that simple day, something inside him had changed. And he had no idea what to do about it. The rain had started early, and by night it was hammering against the library windows. One of those endless small-town storms. Lightning split the sky, and for a moment I thought Lucas wasn't coming. But he showed up, shirt-soaked, water streaming from those fancy leather shoes that had probably never touched mud before. He edged in, awkward, balancing his folders and an elegant pen, peering around as if the library were a maze too dangerous to trust. The bulbs overhead hummed and flickered. I didn't like him, never had, but almost offered him tea. Almost. Pride is hard to put aside when you know you're about to lose everything. Lucas sat by the window, the table always covered in books that never got returned because of missing cards, and laid his papers out carefully. Thunder made the bookshelf shake. He didn't blink. Sat there, stone-faced, pretending the rain had nothing to do with the dread inside. I grabbed a cloth, wiped up the water he'd left behind, and tried to breathe. "I need you to sign here, Clara." "Just procedure," he said, but the words came out strange, as if even he doubted what he was asking for. Sign it, and the library was done. He knew that. The clock struck 8. Outside, just rain. Inside, the smell of damp paper, old stories, a couch that had seen it all. Not library silence, but a silence thick and alive, sitting heavy on your shoulders. I refused to look at him. Maybe that's why Lucas only looked at the paper. Then a bolt split the night, and everything happened at once. The lights blinked, shuddered, and died. We were wrapped in such thick darkness the street itself disappeared. Half of me wanted to laugh at how ridiculous it was. The other half wanted to cry. Lucas didn't look scared, but it was clear he had no idea what to do, trapped in a dead library, in a storm, with no power. I fumbled for my phone behind the counter. The flashlight beam cast giant shadows through the shelves. In some strange way, that thin strip of light put us together on the same island, right in the middle of the room. "Best to wait," I said, without turning, trying to keep it practical. "I don't usually sign things in the dark." He laughed, soft and surprised, the first real laugh, no lawyer's suit on top. Not easy or wide, almost like he didn't know he could laugh. I sat on the floor, propped against the classic shelf, and saw Lucas hesitate. For a second, he looked at the door, maybe wondering if he could escape the embarrassment. But he stayed, took off his jacket, set it down, and got comfortable on the other side of the low table. For a while, no words. The rain made more noise than our thoughts. Now and then, I'd glance sideways, trying to figure out what hurt more, the end approaching, or the new, strange comfort of not being quite so alone. Lucas held the pen like a weapon or a shield, ran a hand through still wet hair, ill at ease. It was obvious he was out of his element, out of himself, and that made everything more real. His eyes wandered the spines of the books, but from time to time, they rested on me. When our eyes met, he looked away quickly, as if even noticing something between us was forbidden. I decided to cut through the darkness. Picked up one of the most tattered books, The Little Prince, the one that soothed scared kids on stormy nights. "Mind if I read to pass the time?" I asked, more to myself than to him. He shrugged, trying to seem indifferent, but his voice was soft. Sure. I started reading slowly, careful with the words, taking in the musty smell of old paper, hearing the rhythm of my own breath. With every paragraph, the noise outside faded, the storm shrank, the fear ebbed little by little. Lucas was looking at me differently. Not with challenge, anger, or superiority. With something else. An attentive curiosity, as if through that story he might learn something about me nothing in a contract could tell. In the pauses between paragraphs, I could feel his eyes on me. And I felt that, somehow, we were making a quiet agreement. Maybe he too was tired of always fighting everything, all the time. There was nothing romantic about that room full of damp boxes, a leak dripping onto the table, cold wind sneaking through a crack. But, in the strangest way, it was comforting. I realized I trusted Lucas right then. Not to save anything. Just to share the dark. Time dragged. He noticed I was shivering and, without a word, took off his coat and offered it to me. I almost said no, but ended up accepting, feeling a bemused flush in my cheeks. He smiled again, more surely this time, and for a minute I forgot why we were even there. When the power came back, the lights blinked on, and reality rushed in through the open door. I closed the book quickly, almost embarrassed at having let so much about myself slip. Lucas picked up his papers, but didn't push for my signature. He just fiddled with them, as if unsure of the next step. Our eyes met again. This time, neither of us looked away. 2 seconds, maybe 3, enough to know that something between us had shifted that night. We said nothing. There was no need. The rain outside finally started to fade. In here, for the first time in ages, I felt peace. I think you did too. The rain outside still echoed, now just a timid drumming against the windows. The smell of rain mixed with old paper and cold coffee. The books were stacked everywhere, holding their silence, witnesses to everything. Clara sat on the floor, leaning against the lowest shelf, legs crossed, fidgeting with her fingers without even realizing it. Lucas sat a little distance away, looking through the window as if seeing something invisible, a forgotten cup of tea beside him. They hadn't talked much since that stormy night. It was as though they were both waiting for something, maybe bravery, or just the right moment to not let it mean too much. Today, Clara had come by early, before the kids arrived. Lucas was already there, shuffling through papers, putting on his usual stony act. But from afar, she could tell he hadn't slept. She approached, slowly, the way only someone who's afraid of breaking a fragile spell knows how to do it. For a moment, he looked up. The exchange was brief, but there was something new in it, maybe exhaustion, maybe a silent plea not to be seen. She sat on the worn rug in front of him, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Another coffee?" she asked softly, breaking the silence with the faintest sound. He shook his head, an almost imperceptible smile hovering at the corner of his mouth. The floor creaked whenever a car passed on the street, and the old clock kept time to a conversation left unspoken. Clara wanted to ask 1,000 questions, to understand the layers of him that seemed out of reach. But she didn't want to push him away. So she feigned interest in the yellow rental card, just to start some kind of conversation. "Mr. Aristu." He used to say a library isn't just books, it's memory. I think it was hard for him to sell this place. For me, it was like losing a family member. Lucas went tense. She could tell, because he froze with the pen on the paper, staring into empty space. The silence between them grew heavier than before. "Have you ever," her voice trembled, "ever lost someone like that? Someone who made you feel at home?" For a second, Lucas didn't even breathe. You could see it. Her question hung in the air like a forbidden secret. He remained completely still until his fingers stopped fidgeting with the pen. His gaze darkened, as if the lights in the library had suddenly dimmed. He answered only with the faintest of nods. It was in that subtle break that Clara saw a crack in his stoic mask, a distant gaze, an old sadness trapped in his clenched jaw. She felt like apologizing, saying he didn't have to answer. But she took a deep breath and decided not to fill the silence. She just stayed there, sharing the weight of what wasn't being said. Lucas changed the subject quickly, pointing to some random book in the pile. "This title's wrong, isn't it? Wuthering Heights." An awkward attempt to escape. But in his voice there was a tiny quiver, enough to make Clara want to dig deeper, yet she also knew how cruel it could be to press too hard. So she simply smiled. "It is," she replied, pulling the book over to adjust the spine, "but it's old. Some things you leave the way they are because they're part of the story, you know?" He smiled back, but with a distant look. Inside, Lucas was irritated. He was an expert at controlling everything: contracts, decisions, speeches. But he didn't know what to do with that emptiness her question had left in his chest. Part of him wanted to stand up and leave, slam doors, lock feelings away. But another, overwhelming urge made him want, just for one night, to talk, to trust, to let go of all that armor. Clara crossed her arms, trying to hide her nerves. She recognized that expression. She'd seen it in her mother's eyes after her father left. It was the kind of pain you don't tell just anyone. And she understood, without effort, that Lucas perhaps had never spoken about it, not even with himself. The sound of a motorcycle roaring down the street almost shattered the moment. They stayed in silence, but it was a different kind now. One where both could hear their own fast-beating hearts, both wanting to move forward, both wanting to stay safe. Lucas fiddled with his watch, restless, as if the strap were bothering him. His eyes kept searching the bookshelves for something to latch on to, anything to avoid meeting hers. In that split second, Clara realized he was struggling not to give in. And she admired that not out of pride, but for seeing the inner battle of someone who, even while wounded, was fully present. She decided not to push. She got up slowly, grabbed a bookmark, and started to organize the books on another shelf. But she stayed alert, listening to the sound of pages turning, waiting for any sign from him. Lucas, hiding behind paperwork, let his thoughts run wild. He could almost hear his own mother saying the pain never goes away, but you learn to breathe with it. He kept remembering the smell of Sunday cakes, the old piano in the empty house, the way he avoided touching on those subjects with anyone. But now, somehow, hiding everything seemed impossible. With Clara, it was as if every unspoken word was written on his face. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, wanting to open up. He thought of the nights he'd spent alone, how much he'd hated his own reflection for pretending nothing hurt. And for the first time in years, he wished he wasn't alone with that weight. Clara came back, gently setting a cup of tea on the table beside him. It was just a gesture, but it carried so much. Lucas looked at her again, and this time, he didn't try so hard to hide. That was how they stayed. No apologies, no explanations. Just an understanding so intense it made words unnecessary. And, as the library slowly warmed back up, Lucas felt his heart racing, but less suffocated. For an instant, he thought maybe trust began like this. A shared silence, someone respecting your space, and a simple cup of tea when you need comfort. That early afternoon, the city was colder than usual, gray clouds weighing over the square, tiny dry leaves rolling down the stone sidewalk. The scent of damp earth came from the flower bed in front of the library. Inside, the light was always softer, filtered through white curtains and the shelves packed with books that seemed to watch everything with ancient calm. I remember the door slamming hard, almost startling. Lucas and Clara were cataloging donated books, wrapped in one of those silences full of respect, when you're not sure if it's friendship or something more, when the knock interrupted everything. The businessman walked in. He was the kind of person who doesn't ask permission and never looks anyone in the eye. Dark suit, cold smile, a black briefcase under his arm. He just shrugged at the place, as if all those books, those photos on the wall, were junk. He walked slowly around, sizing things up with beady eyes, scuffing his shoe at a shelf, searching for floss. Lucas went rigid. I saw his jaw move, as if he wanted to swallow the words coming up, but decided not to say anything. It was protocol, I guess. He was the lawyer, hired to carry out the order. He couldn't show anything. Still, his eyes flickered between Clara and the businessman, alert, like someone ready to jump in front of danger. At first, the businessman pretended Clara didn't exist, as if she were part of the furniture. He started measuring the walls, jotting numbers in his notebook, making loud comments about knocking this down, demolishing that, repurposing the land. In that moment, Clara seemed smaller. It wasn't just fear for the library, but an indignation that made her heart beat faster. You could see it in how tightly she gripped a children's book, so much harder than on other days when she gently stroked the covers. Lucas tried to keep his distance, but the second he heard a remark about selling the shelves by the pound for wood, he stepped forward, like someone who couldn't stand to listen in silence anymore. His eyes burned, and I know it wasn't because of the businessman. It was because of all of it, for having been sent there to play a role that hurt more and more by the minute. Amidst the commotion, Clara spoke, her voice struggling not to tremble. None of this means anything to you, does it? The businessman just laughed, opened his briefcase with a calculated move. He pulled out the paperwork for the sale, flashed it like a trophy, talked about the price paid, the next steps, without ever truly looking at her. Lucas, who until then had only observed, noticed something off in the documents. Maybe a misplaced stamp, a smeared signature, something out of place. He frowned and thumbed through some pages, but then handed them back, like he was forcing himself not to see anymore. A heavy silence followed, the kind that fills the air with words unsaid. The businessman didn't notice, or pretended not to, and left, announcing he'd return soon with a crew from the construction company. The closing door echoed, too loud, like a storm warning. Clara stood frozen, not even able to cry. Lucas was still holding one of the documents, but he dropped it quickly, as if it were burning his hands. For the first time, she didn't look at him as someone she could trust. "Lucas," she said, her voice barely audible, "if you already know something's wrong, can't you? I don't know. Do something? At least try to help?" He closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath, as if every word from her was pulling him into dangerous territory. "That's not how it works," he replied, his voice harsher than he meant. "I'm the lawyer on this case, Clara. What you're asking is unethical. I can't." The silence now was different. You could feel it in your skin. Her eyes searched for his, wanting to find even a trace of the man who helped stack boxes, who laughed with her at the end of the day. But Lucas looked away. Just a second, but that glance hurt more than any words. He wondered if he'd done the right thing. Part of him wanted to chase after the businessman, demand answers, fight it all. But that damned ethics was the last thing left standing between him and ruin. He'd spent so long behind walls, now he didn't know what was right or wrong. He just knew he didn't want to disappoint her anymore, and ironically, by keeping quiet, he knew that's exactly what he was doing. Clara hugged the children's book, resting her chin on the spine. She looked exhausted. He could see, in her eyes, a desperate plea for help. A plea he couldn't answer. At that moment, Lucas felt a rage toward himself unlike anything he'd ever known. An almost physical urge to tear off the suit, throw the law books away, be just the man he started to become after meeting Clara. But he stayed there, frozen, hiding the pain in his chest. The wind battered the windows, made the curtains sway faintly. Outside, the sky just kept getting darker. They were together, but it felt like there were miles between them. She whispered, almost to herself, "I thought you might be different." Her words lingered between them, heavy with hurt. Lucas wanted to explain, to apologize, to promise anything. But he did nothing. He just stood there, fist clenched, forcing the breath from his lungs. Because, in that instant, all he wasn't enough. And that was the worst silence of all. The city faded out, no more laughing children in the square, no sound of turning pages. Just the wind, and the distance growing inside each of them. With all his brilliant career, Lucas realized that for the first time he was losing something that really mattered, and he had no idea who to turn to. The library's main hall was emptier than ever. Even the sound of Clara's footsteps on the wooden floor felt strange, as if the space had forgotten how to echo joy. Almost no books left on the shelves, just some forgotten old titles, because she'd already packed away the rest bit by bit, trying to postpone the inevitable. Clara clutched the old clock that had belonged to her mother. One of those wall clocks, with golden hands and a crack in the glass. She was taking it home, afraid to forget its sound, the gentle ticking that filled long childhood silences. It was the only noise on that gray afternoon, because even the street outside was strangely quiet, like the world itself felt the weight of this goodbye. That's when Lucas appeared, standing in the doorway. He didn't come in right away, just lingered there, holding the black briefcase, his shirt immaculate, but his eyes, they were different. The cold certainty was gone. They both knew why he was there. No need to spell it out. The order was signed. This was the end. She said nothing, just looked at him with a kind of silent question, as if somewhere deep down she still hoped something might change at the last second. But nothing changed. Lucas stood frozen, hands gripping the briefcase by pure habit. He couldn't look at Clara for long. He'd always been good at holding his silence, watching people lose things. It was part of the job. But with her, it was different. The silence was painful, heavy, uncomfortable. He wanted to say something, but nothing seemed right. The only sound was the clock's slow ticking, almost mocking them. Clara blinked hard, swallowing down the lump in her throat. It wasn't just losing the books or the memories. She was losing a piece of herself, the days her mother taught her to read. Every child that sat on the colored rug listening to made-up stories. She thought of that, and also how Lucas no longer seemed like the enemy. There was something like regret in his eyes, an apology trapped and choking. He wondered if she hated him now, or if it was just exhaustion. In that moment, Lucas realized he'd never hated his job this much. The money, the accolades, the slaps on the back. He wanted to offer her something comfort, a word. But all he could do was breathe a little deeper, wrestle with his own reflex to stay indifferent. The corridor seemed longer than ever. Between the door and her desk, there was a strange abyss. Lucas placed the briefcase on the table, slowly. "Clara," he began, and stopped. She didn't want to listen. With her back turned, she was packing a random box. She wanted to hide from his eyes. She wanted to hate him, but all she had left was exhaustion. The kind that stops even the tears. He tried again, voice barely above a whisper. Clara decided to sit down, her legs suddenly weak. The clock in her lap, fingers almost white from gripping it. She remembered her mother's face, those hopeful eyes. She'd promised to take care of this place, even without knowing how. "Here, everyone has a home," her mother used to say. But now, Lucas saw her hands trembling. He noticed when she hid her face in her sleeve, just for an instant. He felt small. Looking at her, he wanted to cross the space between them, to gently touch her hand, tell her he'd figure it out, that she just needed to wait. But not even he believed that. In law, everything is final, black and white. But looking at Clara, he saw life just wasn't like that. Silence again. Outside, the drizzle began, tiny beads of rain against the dirty windows. The air grew colder. Clara thought to speak, but no sound came. She imagined a scream, or a plea. But what good would it do? Lucas sat across from her, but not too close. They stayed like that for a few minutes, no words. He looked at the clock in her lap, at the quiet tears running down her cheeks. No one should go through this alone, he thought. But that's what was happening. Time seemed to stretch out endlessly. It was impossible to tell if it was night or just late. The smell of old books, once comforting, now stung. The phone at the front desk blinked, but no longer rang. When he finally spoke, it was only a whisper. "I'm sorry." That was it. Not even she knew if it was enough. But what happened after was even stronger. She lifted her gaze, looking at him with the honesty of someone who has nothing left to lose. He realized how badly he wanted to hold her, to truly ask how she was, to hear what she couldn't say. But something held him back, maybe fear, maybe the weight of his own history. Clara wiped her tears, took a deep breath. She saw in his eyes the same loneliness that had followed her since her mother died. It was a different pain, but just as invisible. Lucas's umbrella was by the door. It was already dripping. He hesitated, then turned away, leaving with heavy steps. But before he left, he glanced back. And in that look, there was no more distance of lawyer and client. Only two lost strangers, each learning their own way to lose. She stayed, not knowing whether to pray for him to return or to disappear for good. The clock in her lap, the ticking like a lament. It was the day everything ended and everything began to change, though you couldn't see it yet. Lucas was never one to act on impulse. But that afternoon, seeing Clara in the empty library, her whole world on her shoulders, something inside him unraveled. Maybe it was the vulnerability in her eyes, or the way she clung to the old clock, as if time might slow down. He felt a lump form in his throat. His hard exterior told him to keep his distance, but his feet, they moved, almost against his will. He thought it over several times before asking, rehearsed in his mind as if stepping into a trap, but in the end, the words just came out. "Have you had dinner yet?" Clara looked at him, surprised. He almost backed down. He was certain she'd refuse. He even expected it. But she took a deep breath, ran her hand through hair hastily tied back, and said yes. The word almost vanished in the quiet of the library. The town restaurant was nothing special. Yellow light, worn tile floor, the same tables for years. There was a pitcher of water in the corner, a few crooked paintings, the smell of spices mixed with memory. Even so, to Lucas the place felt warmer than any boardroom. Maybe because there, with Clara, he had no script. Every step was unfamiliar. They sat near the window, where you could hear the light rain drumming on the awning. Clara was still tense. She looked at her hands, fussed nervously with a napkin. From time to time, she gently bit her lip, Lucas noticed, and thought how she seemed like someone holding back tears on willpower alone. The waiter brought 2 plates of simple food. No fancy wines, just rice, meat, potatoes. Lucas realized he was starving, but not for food. It was another kind of hunger, the emptiness that makes people act strange. He saw it in Clara's eyes, too. "Why did you agree to have dinner with me?" he wanted to ask. But he chose silence, at least for now. The beginning of the conversation was awkward. The kind of pause that makes noise. Neither knew whether to smile or look away. Lucas prodded at his fork, as if studying the silverware was easier than facing his emotions. He wanted to find the right words, but every time he thought about the case, he remembered her face, the loneliness of that library, the children who would lose that place. Clara broke the silence first, in a threat of a voice. "I think I've never been this scared in my life," she said. She looked into his eyes, unblinking. "It's strange because I'm not just fighting for the library. I feel like it's the last thing that still connects me to my family." The words hung in the air, heavy with something unspoken. Lucas felt his chest tighten. He wanted to tell her he understood, but he held back. She went on. "When I was little, my mother used to say hope was like a book, even closed. You know, there's a beautiful story waiting to happen. I don't know if I believe in that anymore." A sad little smile curled her lips. For a minute, Lucas forgot what they were supposed to be talking about. He started to see Clara not just as an opponent in a legal battle, but as someone struggling to survive. He tried to say something, but his voice came out almost dry. "You get used to losing things. At first it hurts, then it just becomes routine." The words slipped out before he could stop them. He never spoke about his family, about old pain, about how everything turned cold after grief. But in that weird little restaurant, under the soft glow, something inside him let go. Maybe it was a gesture. The way Clara took his hand, without thinking, just to help explain her own fear. The touch was quick, light, but Lucas felt as if the world paused for a split second. He looked at their hands, felt a warm wave run through him. Clara noticed his shift, but didn't pull her hand away. She stayed like that, as if she were looking for warmth, too. In these moments, time is a strange animal. Long minutes, short sentences. The silence changed, grew softer. There was hope tucked in there. Or maybe just relief at not having to fake being strong all the time. "Do you always do that?" she asked. Lucas raised his eyebrows, uncertain. "Care about the person on the other side." The question brought a shy smile, a kind of invitation. Lucas stared at the ceiling for a second, thinking of a whole life spent in files, court cases, strict sentences. "No," he answered, voice almost hoarse. "Usually I don't even remember people's faces. But you. I don't know why. I remember." It was almost a confession. For a second, Clara didn't know what to do with the words. He caught a new light in her eyes. Almost imperceptible, but it was there. The twining of their fingers, the way she took a careful breath as if she carried all the world's questions. But she didn't ask any. The scrape of a fork on a plate, the aroma of spices, the waiter murmuring in the background. Even the rain outside seemed to join their conversation. In the window's reflection, Lucas saw his own face, serious, tired, but less cold. He couldn't say if this was the beginning of something, but for the first time in ages, he wanted to stay a while longer, just to see what Clara would say next. The night moved slowly. They talked little, maybe because the important things had already been said in silence. Lucas asked about old books. Clara replied by telling stories about people from town. In the end, it was a way of drawing closer, stumbling through memories, sharing small pieces of what hurt. When they finished, neither wanted to leave. They stayed there, hands still entwined on the table, as if any movement could break the spell. Neither had any idea what would happen next. Lucas sensed the fear lurking, but for the first time, it wasn't stronger than the desire to stay. The world outside seemed far away. In that gentle light, with the sound of the rain, Clara and Lucas discovered a new way to exist, together, but not yet knowing what tomorrow would bring. You don't always need to say everything to understand. Sometimes shared silence speaks louder than 1,000 promises. And in that unlikely dinner, full of pauses and honest glances, the two of them took the first step toward rewriting their own story. The night after the dinner felt strange, as if the city had woken to a whisper it couldn't claim as its own. Downtown, near the ice cream shop, little groups talked with their backs toward the library. You didn't have to listen to know what it was about. Glances lingered too long. Nervous, muffled laughter bubbled up as soon as Clara passed by. The quiet slap of flip-flops on the street now sounded like a warning with every step. She knew she shouldn't care, but how not to feel it? The way Mrs. Jandira closed her window too early, an invitation suddenly withdrawn. Or Mr. Navaldo's nod without his usual smile. It was as if, all at once, everyone had decided trusting hurt less than doubting, and she became the reason for the wound. Clara climbed the library steps alone, holding her coat close against the blade of wind starting to slice through. Inside, that old paper smell, comfort, and longing all mixed up. She leaned on the desk, forced her shoulders to relax. It was no use. The dinner, so intimate, felt far away now. She almost doubted. Did Lucas feel the same? A little lost? A little exposed? He hadn't replied to her last message. Actually, she hadn't even sent it. The phone screen glowed, her finger hovering over the keys. She wrote, "Hope you got home safe." Didn't send. Rewrote, Thank you for dinner. Deleted it again. It felt like if she put anything out there, even a kindness, all her weakness would turn to gossip in town. The silence was worse than any rumor. It was a silence brimming with expectation, as if everyone, even herself, knew something important was about to happen, and that it would hurt. Lucas was used to judgment, but not this kind. He felt the change in the air the minute he got out of the taxi at the hotel, the cooler reception, the curious looks in the lobby. Even his own partner, in a blunt message, wanted details about the dinner. Personal interest gets in the way, he'd written. Lucas stared at the screen for a long time. He thought of replying. Didn't. That night, he couldn't sleep. He paced his hotel room, listening to the scattered cars outside on the cobblestone street. His mind wouldn't rest. All he could think about was Clara, the look in her eyes when she confessed how afraid she was to lose everything. Now what? He was scared, too, but of what? The old friend, Andre, turned up the very next morning. He came unannounced, with that overconfident swagger of his, always talking with his hands, never missing a chance to exaggerate a story. While Lucas sipped cold coffee, Andre sat down, casual as ever, like he might crack a joke at any moment. So, Doc, tired of the countryside yet? Are you looking for an excuse to stick around, huh? Lucas gave a weak smile. Andre never missed a thing, especially when it came to poking at other people's secrets. I'm here for work, he replied. But it was a lie, and he was pretty sure Andre could tell. Andre's silences were heavy, almost threatening. Watch the stories, Lucas. Everything turns into a soap opera here. He lowered his tone, eyes locking with Lucas. Remember how it was last time? This town's got a long memory. Lucas felt a blow. No one had mentioned that in years, the mistake, the weakness that nearly cost him his license, back then. The sort of thing his firm could never imagine, but Andre knew as if it were an old childhood scar. It was obvious. This was a warning. Was it a threat or concern? Hard to tell. The mood grew tense, like glass about to crack. The words were there, but not the important ones. Those hung between them, sharp as knives. Across town, Clara was trying to open the library on time. Hardly anyone came in. Only the shy girl with the braids rushed in to grab a book. The weight of loneliness hurt more there than it did among whispered gossip. The phone rang just once, a local woman, her voice sharp, wanting to know when Clara was going to hand over the keys to this godforsaken place to that guy from the firm. She couldn't bring herself to answer. She just stood there, hand trembling, face burning with shame and anger. Among the shelves, Clara felt the urge to cry. She remembered a line from one of her childhood books, affection is what saves people. But what do you do when no one's willing to offer that, right now? Her phone vibrated on the desk. Clara only glanced at it, not touching. Lucas's name blinked on the screen, promise or warning. She couldn't tell. She read the message he hadn't had the courage to send. It was nothing but a dot. Like a breath, a word caught in his throat. That night, Sao Paulo dawned inside Lucas's chest too, cold, massive, full of meaningless noise. He wrote Clara a message, sorry for all this discomfort. Once again, he just stared at the screen. Didn't send it. Slipped the phone into his pocket, left his room, and went for a walk. Under a lamppost, he stood for too long, as if waiting for someone, but it was just him, trying to find himself. At the library, Clara turned off the light slowly. The silence was vast, though not empty. It carried everything they couldn't say, the fear of losing, or being seen as a traitor, the doubt, the guilt. Every gesture was careful, almost ritualistic. Straightening books, adjusting chairs, closing curtains. Like preparing her soul for the night ahead. Before leaving, Clara glanced at the armchair by the window, where Lucas had sat days before. She wanted to believe it had been real, that the calm she'd felt belonged to him too. But inside, a knot was growing. She wondered if she could trust, if she was as brave as she liked to believe. From a distance, Lucas looked at the library too. He didn't even know why. He wanted to picture Clara inside, reading, smiling, with that quiet strength. But today, he felt an aching distance, as if millions of invisible things now separated them. And inside there, among all the words left unsaid, a small certainty was blooming. Beneath rumors, judgment, and fear, a longing, almost a whisper, not to let go of each other's hand, even if only in thought. In the city's hush, in averted glances, and unsent messages, that was what remained. And maybe, for that night, it was enough. The night was already deep when Lucas stepped through the office lobby, the cold lights whiter than ever. Down below, the city was still breathing, alive with honking and headlights, but here it was all stillness. The kind of silence he knew too well. Not peace. Something else. The emptiness after victory, the echo that follows big decisions. The sound of his own footsteps, too loud on the frozen marble. He ran a hand over his face, exhausted. He couldn't remember if he'd eaten that day. Maybe some coffee, just to trick his stomach. It didn't matter. What really weighed were the images of Clara, still so clear behind his eyelids. Ever since he'd met her, forgetting her seemed impossible. That slightly off-key laugh, those big gestures as she told a story, the way she looked at books, like she'd found a refuge from the world right there. Lucas shouldn't have come back so late, but the more he tried to outrun his thoughts, the more he needed something to do. So he pulled out that file again, the one he'd practically memorized by now. But in that silence, everything looked different. He read each line slowly. He spotted details that hadn't stood out before. Mismatched dates. Signatures oddly out of place. His heart raced. He was no fool. He knew there was dirt in the deal. But seeing the proof right there, plain as day, was different. It was all so clear, just waiting for someone to notice. He was scared to believe it, but inside, he knew Clara had been right all along. The sale was a scam. The property shouldn't have changed hands. The library shouldn't be under threat. For a moment, everything felt still. Lucas sat frozen, fingers digging into the pages, body stiff in the leather chair. The weight of his whole past on his shoulders. He'd always played by the rules. Asking questions was dangerous. Lawyers don't get their hands dirty. They just argue. He'd never challenged an order. Victory was victory. The rest was just noise. That kind of logic, that's what made his career shine. That's what his father had always wanted for him. That coldness had protected him when his world flipped upside down and he'd lost everything. But now, it was different. There wasn't just the case anymore. There was Clara. Every time he thought of her smile between the stacks, a new crack appeared in that old armor. She was too much hope. Too much dream. And that was dangerous. She was what he thought he'd never have again. The urge to believe in something good. To try, even knowing the risk. His phone blinked twice in his pocket. A message from a partner? Maybe. Lucas didn't check. The sound of rain mixed with the constant hum of the air conditioning, pattering insistently at the windows. He closed his eyes and listened, not just to the rain, but also to Clara's laughter, to the way she'd suddenly turned serious talking about her readers. The pride in her eyes when she handed a book to a child. The fear, disguised as bravery. There was so much left unsaid between them, so much fear of trusting. He wondered when he'd started to want to let someone down, even knowing the consequences. He'd never thought of risking something big for the right reason. Now, it was different. Holding those papers felt like holding a chance to change everything, not just for Clara, but for himself. He tried to rationalize, but lying to himself was impossible. If he turned those papers in, he'd be throwing away everything he'd built, his reputation, his father's proud look in old photos. Maybe even his career, the dinners with important people, whispered compliments in the hallway. But if he kept quiet, he'd destroy her last hope. Worse, he'd kill the part of him that was just now beginning, tentatively, to come back to life. Deep down, he knew the answer. He was afraid to admit it, but he already knew. The resume didn't matter. The salary didn't matter. None of it was worth more than one memory, Clara, daydreaming, tucking an old bookmark into a children's book. Smiling to herself, pretending not to notice his eyes, unwillingly drawn to that innocent little scene. It was hard to remember the last time he'd felt so out of control. He ran his hands through his hair, already messy from so much tugging, so much thinking. He tried to stand, but stayed seated a moment longer. He wanted to call Clara, tell her everything right then. No formalities, just ask her to trust him. But he didn't know what to say. Wasn't sure he could keep his voice steady. The clock blinked in the corner of the screen. 2 a.m. The office felt like a battlefield, but the real war was inside him. He remembered the friend who threatened to expose his oldest wound. The firm, waiting for results. The sleeping city, and a woman, awake somewhere, likely counting down the minutes until her future was decided. For years, Lucas had lived as if emotion was dangerous. He didn't allow himself to hesitate. The world didn't forgive weakness. But now, every silence in that office seemed to say something else. If he didn't do what was right, all the money in the world wouldn't quiet his guilt. The papers trembled gently in his fingers. Just paper, but heavy as concrete. For a second, Lucas thought of tearing them up, pretending he'd seen nothing. But it was already too late to go back. Whatever Clara had awakened in him didn't fit in his old behaviors anymore. He felt like crying. Not for a lost career, but for fear of disappointing the one person, deep down, he'd never wanted to disappoint. That hopeful-eyed boy who once believed in happy endings. He wanted to run to her. To say yes, it was all true, that he was scared, but he wasn't running anymore. To hold her and ask for time, for faith. He felt tears prick his eyes, but he took a deep breath, trying to keep it together. The night brought no easy answers. But when he finally stood, Lucas knew that for the first time in years, he was going to choose differently. He would choose Clara, even without knowing how, even at the risk of losing everything except himself. The city seemed duller near evening. The drizzle was fine but relentless, the kind that sticks to your shirt and trickles down your neck. Lucas walked slowly across the square, his folder clutched to his chest. The lamp on the old gazebo was already on, casting a yellow glow over the empty benches. Everything around seemed to be waiting. Even the birds had gone quiet. As he neared the library, he caught the sweet smell of coffee mixed with damp wind. Inside, Clara was rearranging a stack of poetry books. Her hair, hurriedly pinned up, was escaping the bun as she distractedly read a passage out loud. He paused outside, watching her. His throat tightened. He wanted to leave, to return to that safe, steady life, without swings, without eyes like hers. She saw his shadow first, turned, holding the book like a shield, her face tense, caught between surprise and self-defense. The silence between them was thick. Not warm, not cold. There was no hate, just carefulness, and a kind of anxiety that hurt right to the bone. He took far longer than he should have to break the silence. "Can I come in?" She didn't answer, only stepped aside a bit, leaning against the shelf. The tiniest invitation, unguarded. Inside, Lucas's hands were slick with sweat, his heart beating in his throat. The library seemed bigger now. Each chair recalled recent conversations, night after night, each defending their own view, arguments and sidelong glances tossed back and forth. He closed the door softly, then finally moved the folder from his chest, almost ashamed of what he was carrying. "I needed to talk to you. I couldn't do this from afar." His voice was rough, low. The sound of the wall clock grew louder. Clara didn't look away. Her eyes were sharp, steely, but something in them seemed to plead, "Just don't lie." Lucas opened the folder, pulled out a stack of papers. The sound of staples echoed in the empty room. He set the documents on the small table. "I found proof," he said, taking a deep breath and staring at his own hands. "This whole sale, the story of this land, too many things don't add up. Big people are involved. Bigger than I thought." Clara pressed her lips together, not surprised, just exhausted. She seemed to have been waiting for this for years. She got just close enough to see what he was showing, but didn't touch the papers. Her fingers stayed pressed lightly against the tabletop. "You came to warn me because you want to save me, Lucas, or to save yourself?" The question was small, but it cut deep. He didn't react immediately. He really looked at her, maybe for the first time without his lawyer's mask. Clara's face was tired, vulnerable, but there was something unstoppable about the way she raised her chin. He started, then stopped, annoyed by his own stumble. "I never wanted to be in the middle of this. You know, I spent my whole life believing nothing could get to me, that everything could be solved with contracts, arguments, distance. The truth is I don't know what to do now. If I tell everything, I could lose my job, probably my reputation. But if I stay silent, I destroy this place. I destroy you. And I don't want that anymore. I can't." Silence fell again, but this time it was filled with something new. A shared fear. The fear of losing everything, or of feeling too much. Clara looked at the papers, eyes wet but voice calm. "I want to trust, Lucas. Not just in you, you know? I want to trust that there's still some justice left in the world. That someone's going to notice the kids reading here. That it's worth it to dream. Some days I want to give up, but then someone returns a book with a note, or an old lady tells me a story on the porch, and I think all this is bigger than the pain." He took a deep breath. He wanted to touch her hand, but he didn't have that right. "When my dad died," he whispered, almost surprised to hear himself say it, "I didn't think I'd ever feel anything real again. I spent years hiding behind victories, prizes, money. But here, with you, everything's different. I feel ridiculous, scared, and, in a crazy way, alive again." A single tear slipped from the corner of her eye. Silent, she didn't try to wipe it away. Lucas's face grew hot, his chest aching in a way he barely remembered. It felt like every word ripped out an old part of himself, making room for something else. Lighter. Honest. Clara moved closer, not all the way, but enough that he could almost smell the soap in her hair. She was biting her lip, holding herself back. "And if we fall, Lucas?" He blinked, surprised to see in her the same fear he'd been feeling. "I don't know," he said. But I promise, this time, I won't run. Neither of them smiled. They shared that shiver down the spine, huddled side by side, as if guarding a flame against the wind. Deep in the library, you could hear the rain on the roof. Lucas thought about all the times people said feelings pass, that time heals everything. But here, facing Clara, he wondered if maybe some choices change time, even if you have to pay a steep price. She reached out, hesitated, then pulled back. But the almost touch said it all. An invitation. A come with me. A huge fear, and even so, a beginning. At that moment, Lucas knew his path would never be the same. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't want to run. Night crept in, covering the city with fine rain. Downtown Sao Paulo traffic always had that wet asphalt smell, the blend of horns and flickering lights in taxi windows. Lucas slumped in the back seat, his face half shaded by his jacket. Now and then, he gazed at the brown envelope in his lap. Inside was the builder's letter. Promises of easy money. A list of threats, polished in that tone people use when they know how to destroy reputations without raising their voice. He thought about the weight of that paper. Lucas had faced tense moments in court many times, but nothing like this small, sharp dread in his gut. It was as if his blood had pooled in the center of his chest to warn him that once he stepped out of the car, near the community center, there'd be no turning back. He wanted to call Clara. Didn't know what he'd say if she picked up. I'm afraid? I don't know how to protect you? The dead air of the phone forgotten in his inside pocket was almost relief. Maybe it was better she didn't know what was happening just then. The public meeting was in the church's old hall. The harsh white lights flickered in the storm, a buzz of old bulbs tangled with voices. People came and soaked, the sharp smell of umbrellas and damp paper thick in the air. Up front, Clara steadied herself at the makeshift podium. Her hair was caught any which way, some strands escaping, her face shadowed by sleepless nights. Lucas slipped in quietly, hoping to blend in among the benches. No suit, just a dark shirt open at the collar, carrying that shaky courage of someone feeling so small in the face of what he was about to do. Clara started to speak. It wasn't one of those speeches full of empty promises. She spoke simply. About what the library meant to the kids. About afternoons of reading, battered book covers, the feeling of belonging that only this place gave the town. When she spoke of her own parents, how her mother read to her, fingers crossed for a better life, Lucas held his breath. He had never heard someone lay their heart bare like that, without begging for pity. Someone cried. Down by the steps, a woman dabbed her cheeks with a handkerchief but smiled when Clara thanked her. Lucas stood arms crossed, pressing the envelope, staring at the floor and swallowing the urge to scream at the injustice of it all. The construction company manager took the stage next. Pricey suit, polished smile. Calm, rational tone. A vision for progress. Promises of a new apartment building, jobs, the old song and dance of development. With every word, Lucas's stomach turned. His hands sweat, thumb nervously tapping the envelope clasp. The meeting became a tug of war, hope on one side, threats on the other. The crowd started splitting, glances darting from Clara to the man in the suit. In the back, Lucas spotted the developer's legal team, among them to his former boss, sharing a smirk when their eyes met. A silent warning, watch your next move. And suddenly, everything went slow. For an instant, the only sound left was rain hammering the hall roof. Clara looked back, scanning the crowd until her eyes landed on Lucas. There were no words, no wave. But in her eyes, a silent question. Are you with me? In that brief open silence, Lucas remembered the builder's warning. Say yes, everyone wins. Say no, and no one will save you from the fall. His throat closed up. He wanted to disappear or hide in her arms. Who knew? On Clara's face, for the first time, he saw not just pain but a trust thrown into the dark, as if saying, you choose. I won't give up. He stood, slowly. Every step echoed, as if his shoes weighed a ton each. He took the small stage, unblinking. To shifted in his seat, the lawyers shared glances. Clara stepped back, giving him space, but stayed alert, her body tense, eyes red, breath short. Lucas gripped the microphone with shaking hands. He felt his heart wasn't just beating in his chest anymore, but in his ears. He went silent. The hall was suspended, waiting. No one here really knows me, he started, and his own voice sounded strange to him. Except her. He looked at Clara, asking forgiveness without words. I represented the developer. I came to follow orders, not to think about the consequences. The weight of that secret dropped like a stone. With every word, he felt fear slipping away, as if some part of him was lifting. I saw documents proving fraud in this land sale. I can't keep quiet. Not anymore. Two old ladies covered their mouths. A wave of whispers rolled through the crowd. To-do bristled, ready to object. Lucas pressed on. They're going to try to silence me. They already have. The confessions tore out but rang true. But I'm choosing the right side, even if everything else falls apart. There was no more noise. Just people breathing and Clara's gaze, wide and shining with tears. It was amazing how heavy silence could feel, but right then, it was a hug, not a threat. Lucas handed the envelope to the authorities sitting by the stage, his hand steady but his body shaking all over. He knew nothing would ever be the same. He could feel the angry stares of former colleagues. The whispered traitor passed around the hall. But inside, he felt a strange kind of freedom. As if, after so long trapped in armor, he could finally breathe. Clara said nothing. She didn't rush to him, didn't smile. She just looked, and in her eyes was everything: surprise, fear, gratitude, and above all, a quiet understanding. In those slow steps back to his seat, Lucas felt that, no matter how high the price, he now had the strength to pay it. Maybe, for the first time in years, he knew exactly who he wanted to be. The meeting ended slowly, as if everyone had been caught off guard by his unexpected act. Lucas lingered in the dark hallway, listening to the voices fade away. He didn't look for Clara. He didn't need to. In the silence between them, a choice had been made, wordless and mutual. Outside, the rain thickened, washing away old promises and dusty streets. And Lucas, soaked to the bone, felt the weight of his choices, but also that almost innocent relief of someone who made a decision for love, not out of fear. I'll never forget that morning, because there was a kind of hush hanging over everything, not the icy silence of a courtroom, nor the loneliness that followed me for years, but something different, a pause full of anticipation, waiting for something good to finally happen. Lucas arrived early, not with his usual hurried stride, no tie, shirt untucked, hair messier than he liked. Rain hung on his shoulders, and in his eyes there was exhaustion, but also a quiet hope, as if seeing Clara again might make sense of it all. The library seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The wooden shelves smelled of dust and wet paper, but also a strange, homely warmth. Kids ran outside, laughing, oblivious to half the battle. The old people gathered on the porch, sipping weak coffee, whispering about how everything was going to change now. And Clara was there, waiting by the books, in that light blue sweater, worn soft by years, clutching an envelope with trembling hands. When she saw Lucas, she didn't speak. Didn't really smile. She just stopped breathing for a moment and bit her lip gently, like she was holding the weight of the whole world between her teeth. The silence stretched between them until it was almost painful, not tense, not comfortable, just loaded, like a hug that hasn't happened yet. Clara's eyes were red from crying in secret, but they gleamed with gratitude too. Lucas took 2 steps, unhurried, as if the ground was heavy. They stood face to face, close enough for him to count the freckles on her cheek, too far for him to dare reach out. He thought of everything he'd lost, firm friends who now avoided his gaze, even his father on the phone, disappointed. Lost titles, lost money. But there, with her and the saved library, he realized none of it weighed as heavily as he'd imagined. Clara tried to say something, but the words bounced off her heart and vanished. She looked at the books, took a deep breath, and when she finally found courage, her voice came out tiny. "I don't know how to thank you." The words hung in the air shy, dying before they finished. She moved in closer, barely more than enough to catch the scent of cheap perfume on Lucas's neck, and her eyes brimmed with real, unstoppable tears. The little library was packed with people outside, waving signs, celebrating, but inside, it felt like another world. Only their breathing could be heard. The faint creak of the wood floor. A book falling to a table. Lucas wondered if you could feel happy and sad at the same time. Inside, the question throbbed. Does she understand what this cost? Would he have the courage to do it all again? He opened his mouth, as if to give a speech, but only managed to sigh. Tried to smile, but it was crooked, almost an apology. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand," he murmured, with a sincerity that surprised even himself. Clara met his gaze, and it was as if she answered without words. "It's all right. You made it." Lucas's fingers trembled as he ran a hand through his hair, not knowing what to do with his hands. He was no longer the feared lawyer, the courtroom strategist. He was just a man afraid of losing what he had only just found. Clara reached out slowly, as if afraid to startle a secret. She touched his arm lightly, and for a moment, it felt as if the world itself had stopped. The touch was so simple, so small, yet no embrace in his life had ever felt so urgent or so longed for. That's when he pulled Clara closer, not thinking, just reacting to need and relief. The hug took its time, but when it came, there was no doubt, no embarrassment, no need for explanation. She trembled a little and rested her face against his chest. Lucas breathed in the scent of Clara's hair, sweet, but tinged with dust and the strain of so many hard days. She whispered something, a hoarse little "thank you" he barely heard. He squeezed his eyes shut and, for the first time in years, let a tear fall without trying to hold it back. That embrace was the answer to so many things never said. It was forgiveness, it was a promise, it was everything that had existed between them since the first confrontation. The world outside kept its noisy pace, but in there, it was just the two of them, body warmth, and the promise of a new beginning. At that moment, Lucas knew he was being reborn. Without titles, without armor, without cold plans, only his heart beating, finally open to someone. And Clara, held in his arms, knew she wouldn't have to fight alone anymore. Their future was still dark and uncertain. But there, in that library saved by Lucas's sacrifice, the silence meant something else. It meant hope. It meant home. And as that embrace lingered, Lucas realized what he had won now is worth more than all his past victories. Because this time, it wasn't just about justice, it was about love. It was everything for a new beginning. There had never been so much laughter in that library. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with old books. The whole city was celebrating, but inside, it was as if there was only a tiny universe. Clara, sitting on the floor beside a stack of picture books. Lucas, leaning on the wooden ladder, shelving novels onto still empty shelves. There were no fanfares, no speeches, just that comfortable silence that makes you want to stay a little longer, for no reason at all. It felt strange to Lucas, how everything seemed to lose meaning just as, finally, something started to make sense. There were no deadlines pressing him anymore. No one watching, waiting for him to win or fail. Only Clara, beside him, her hair in a careless twist, one strand falling over her forehead, catching her breath after hauling heavy boxes. And suddenly, he realized. He wished he could freeze that image, make it a photograph. Outside, fireworks still exploded in the distance. Someone shouted, celebrating. But inside, just soft voices. "Can you hand me that book? And be careful with that cover. It's been through a lot." Everything else seemed faded, belonging to a distant past. Lucas tried to act as usual, controlled, practical. Except now, his voice came out softer, almost laughing without realizing it. He ran his hands through his hair, trying to hide a silly nervousness. He watched Clara out of the corner of his eye. He wanted to tell her a million things. "Thank you. I'm sorry. I'll make a new life." But nothing came out. Because there, sitting on the floor of a library rescued by sheer stubbornness, he was learning that some things don't need words. Silence says it all. Clara felt it. She felt the fullness of that silence. She looked at him a little hesitant, a small, shy, almost childlike smile at the corner of her mouth. The kind of smile she had when something amused her in a private way. She thought of everything they'd been through, the injustice, the fear of losing her house of books. She looked at him again, searching, wondering, does he feel it too? Or is it just me, holding on to these details? She handed him a cup of coffee, makeshift, still warm. Their hands brushed, quick, but he didn't pull away. He held on a second longer. Her eyes dropped, quickly, then came back up. Her heart leapt, not in the desperate, aching way, but like hope returning after years away. "Stay a little longer," she said softly, trying to hide the wavering in her voice. It didn't sound like a formal invitation. Just a plea from someone who doesn't know how to say goodbye, and doesn't want to. She was used to getting the tone wrong, more emotion than logic, but she didn't care. Even without meaning to, her look said it all. Now it wasn't him against her, the lawyer versus the librarian of impossible dreams. It was just two survivors, sharing space and a bit of lousy coffee. Lucas responded with the slightest nod, lungs filling with air, like someone deciding to dive in. He sat down next to her, no rush. For a second, their legs almost touched. It wasn't on purpose, but little lights like that brighten everything. As they sorted the books, their fingertips brushed now and then, unintentionally. He asked about the stories, just to hear her voice tell where each came from, who donated them, how each book had changed someone. She answered animatedly, forgetting her shyness, letting her walls fall. For the first time, she felt safe with him. Afternoon light faded away. The sun slid through old windows, painting yellow shapes on the floor. The shouts of the outside party became a distant background. Inside, every step was small, but enormous for two people who'd spent a lifetime running from things that felt too big. He thought about all he'd lost to get here. Family, recognition, a spotless name among suit anti-lawyers. And for the first time, it didn't hurt as much. What struck him, truly, was realizing that, perhaps for everything he'd given up, he had finally found something he never even knew he was seeking. Now and then, Clara would read an old title, make fun of a bad poem, laugh at him like she was telling a silly secret. He laughed too, but it was a new laugh. No defenses. No mask. A laugh you could almost see coming from his eyes, not his mouth. At the end of the tidying, they sat on the steps, backs to the shelves. Tired, sweaty, but happy. There was no more struggle, just rest. Silence fell again, but this time it was peaceful. Their breathing fell in together, and now and then a glance, one that said, "Lucky us, for everything to end this way." Clara tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, leaned her head gently on his shoulder without asking, and he didn't move. He stayed, breathing deep, sensing that maybe this was the real prize for all that fighting, to finally fit, whole, in someone else's world. No rush, no solemn promises, no dramatic ending. Just a real beginning made of quiet laughter, hands that reach for each other without fear, and the certainty that, as unlikely as it seemed, this time love was more than justice. The city felt different that afternoon. It wasn't just the low sun or the scent of damp grass on the wind. Everything seemed softer, as if, for a moment, time itself wanted to rest. Clara slid the bolt on the library door, listening for that click that always brought her a little peace. Inside, everything was in its place, each book nestled just so, the smell of old paper and dusty promises. She inhaled, taking a second longer at the threshold, hesitating on the edge of so many memories. Since childhood, this had been her sanctuary. Now, after all the fear, this place had once again escaped danger. But it was different, because she wasn't alone anymore, defending her shelves. Descending the front steps, she saw Lucas leaning against the gate. He looked out of place there, suit a little rumpled, tie loose, sleeves rolled up over his forearms. The scent of coming rain hung in the air and, for the first time, his gaze wasn't judgmental or guarded. He held a book. An old volume, leather-bound, the gold letters nearly faded. Clara stopped, surprised, heart thumping without her permission. Lucas gave a small, almost shy smile. He wasn't good at this, she knew. Every move of his revealed more than any words, the way he adjusted his glasses, looked down before meeting someone's eyes. There was something fragile about the feared lawyer. Something almost boyish in that instant. "For you," he said, holding the book out between them. She took it with just her fingertips. Read the title and recognized it. The same book she'd quoted weeks ago during one of their heated debates, talking about choices. The Little Prince. A smile escaped. She looked up at him again. Lucas shrugged. "I figured it might be time to read it again. Or, to start. You used to say everyone, sooner or later, misses coming home." He glanced around, almost apologetic for sounding cliché. "And I haven't had a home in a long time. Not a real one." Clara felt the air get both lighter and heavier inside her chest. She clutched the book to her heart, not sure what to say. There was silence. A good silence, one that didn't need to be broken. She could feel the warmth of the sun fading behind rooftops, the whisper of leaves, his breathing mingling with hers. He stepped a little closer, not to startle her, just to be there, right at that distance between longing and respect. "I thought winning was everything," Lucas confessed, his voice low, almost only for her. "After I lost my father, I decided I'd never let myself feel that again. That if I just delivered results, everything would make sense." He stopped, looked at his own shoes, then up at Clara's face. "But then I met you, and nothing I won was worth as much as the fear of losing you." She felt her throat tighten. Part of her wanted to run and hug him. Part of her wanted to flee. But she stayed, because that was it. Even in fear, she wanted to share it with him. "I thought I hated you," she answered, half laughing, half crying. "At first, you were everything I was most afraid of. But when you let yourself fall apart, when you finally stopped trying to be strong, that's when I really saw you." She took a deep breath, letting it happen, finally. "You became my home too." A truck passed in the street, drowning out the rest. Even so, they understood. Their eyes met, a look that bypassed any defense. His eyes were shiny, but he didn't look away. He just stayed there, letting her see him. Slowly, Lucas raised a hand, as if approaching a shy animal, and touched her cheek, a simple gesture, but all in. Clara closed her eyes for a second, letting herself feel the warmth. She thought of all the times she'd wanted this but kept quiet, always letting fear come first. There was no rush. Time felt different there. They forgot the world, forgot the past weighing on their shoulders. She opened her eyes, found his again, and everything was said without a word. Forgiveness. Longing. Wanting to stay. It started raining again, just a light drizzle. The smell of wet earth blended with his cologne. Clara felt like laughing and crying at once. And now, she whispered, "Now, will you let me stay?" Lucas replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Here. Or wherever you want." She nodded, smiling small, sincere, listening to her own heart beating. "Stay. We can start over." Slowly. And it was that simple, that human. Their kiss wasn't like the desperate ones in movies, or heavy with grand promises. It was just a gentle brush of lips. A kiss from people who have forgotten how to be loved, but still choose to try. A quiet kiss, as if to say, there's no need to be afraid of starting again. They stayed like that, for a while no one measured. The sky darkened, streetlights flicked on, one by one. Inside, the library was only silence and stories waiting to be read. Outside, it felt as though Clara and Lucas had made it through everything, every loss, all the words never spoken, just to arrive right here. Together. Where fear ends and something beautiful begins. And that was all. No impossible promises, no guarantees. But there was a sincere wish to discover together what every new day would bring. Every chapter from now on, written by them both, between laughter, silences, and the courage to stay.